Look closely at this. A royal figure, a warrior, a court filled with extraordinary works of art. These are known around the world as the Benin Bronzes. But they came from something much bigger than a collection of beautiful objects. They came from the Kingdom of Benin in what is now southern Nigeria, and behind them was one of West Africa's most powerful royal states, a kingdom with a sophisticated court, specialized artists, international trade, and a capital surrounded by enormous earthworks. So how did this kingdom become so powerful? Who were the people who built it? How did Benin become famous for bronze casting, ivory carving, and royal art? And what happened when the British Army finally entered the city in 1897? The earliest history of Benin is partly preserved through oral traditions, royal histories, and later written accounts. Those traditions speak of an early line of rulers known as the Ogaso, followed later by the dynasty of the Obas. Another important tradition connects the later royal dynasty with Ovonramwen, a ruler associated with the ancient city of Ife. By the 15th century, Benin was entering one of the most important periods of its history. During the reign of Oba Ovonramwen, Benin's power expanded, its military organization strengthened, and the capital was transformed. The city was fortified with enormous earthworks, while the royal court became a major center of political and artistic life. Benin was not simply a palace surrounded by villages. It was a complex political center with a highly organized royal court and specialized guilds of craftsmen. The palace itself became a place where art, politics, religion, and royal authority came together. And then there were the artists. Benin developed specialized hereditary guilds whose craftsmen produced extraordinary works for the royal court. Among them were the brass casters of the Onramwen Guild. Their work included plaques, commemorative heads, and other objects connected to the palace and royal rituals. One of the techniques associated with Benin's famous brass sculptures is lost wax casting. The artist creates a wax model, covers it with clay, heats the mold so the wax melts away, and then pours molten metal into the space left behind. When the mold is broken, the sculpture is revealed. Then Benin's story became connected to a much wider world. Portuguese traders reached the region in the late 15th century. Trade expanded, and Benin gained access to new materials, including large quantities of brass. European visitors also became subjects in Benin's art. But to understand Benin's power, we have to understand the institution at its center. The Oba. At the center of Benin's political world was the Oba, the king. But the Oba was more than a political ruler. He was also a central religious figure, responsible for important ceremonies and rituals, and he stood at the head of an elaborate palace organization. The Oba did not govern alone. Around him was a complex network of palace officials, chiefs, and specialized groups, each with responsibilities within the royal institution. The palace was therefore more than a residence. It was the political and spiritual heart of the kingdom. Look at the Oba's clothing. Coral beads were not simply decoration. They became closely associated with royal identity, power, and spiritual significance. The use of coral in Benin's royal regalia continues to this day. And the palace was also a place of work. Specialized guilds produced objects for the royal court, working in brass, ivory, wood, and other materials. Their skills were passed through established traditions, helping create the distinctive art for which Benin became famous. The power of the Oba was also reflected in the city itself. Under powerful rulers, Benin's capital was expanded and reorganized, while enormous earthworks marked and protected the growing urban landscape. But these earthworks weren't created in one single moment. Archaeological research shows that Benin's urban landscape developed in phases over centuries. This is one of the things that makes Benin's story so remarkable. The city we imagine today was not created overnight by one king. Generations of people shaped it, digging, building, farming, trading, governing, and expanding the communities around the royal center. The archaeology shows us a city that changed over time. And Benin's power did not stop at the city. Its influence expanded across surrounding territories, while the kingdom became part of wider regional and international trade networks. By around 1500, Benin's political influence extended across a substantial area of what is now southern Nigeria. But perhaps the most extraordinary evidence of Benin's power wasn't its armies. It wasn't even the size of its city. It was what its artists were able to create. And soon the walls of the royal palace would become a gallery unlike anything European visitors had expected to find in West Africa. Inside the royal palace, art was not simply decoration. It recorded history, celebrated kings, honored ancestors, and communicated the power of the Oba. Some of the most remarkable works were cast in metal and displayed within the royal palace. Look closely at the plaques. They show Obas, royal officials, warriors, attendants, and ceremonial scenes. Some also show Europeans. These weren't random portraits. They were part of a visual language through which the royal court remembered important people and events. Creating these objects required extraordinary skill. Benin specialist brass casters used the lost wax process. First came the model, then the clay mold. The wax was removed by heat, and molten metal was poured into the space it left behind. Once the mold was broken, the finished work could be revealed. The knowledge wasn't simply available to anyone who wanted to learn it. Brass casting was associated with specialized hereditary guilds serving the royal court. One of the best known was the Igun Eronwan Guild. Skill was passed from one generation to another. But Benin's artists didn't work only in metal. Ivory carvers produced elaborate works for the royal court, including carved tusks and other ceremonial objects. The palace supported different specialized crafts, each contributing to the visual language of royal power. And this is where the art becomes more than beautiful. It gives us clues about Benin society. We see the Oba's regalia. We see court officials. We see warriors and foreign visitors. We see objects associated with ceremony and royal authority. The palace walls were, in a sense, preserving a visual record of the kingdom. Some of the most interesting images show Europeans. Portuguese merchants and sailors began arriving in the region in the late 15th century. Their arrival connected Benin to new international trading relationships, and Benin's artists incorporated these encounters into the visual world of the royal court. Benin was not an isolated civilization. Its artists, rulers, and merchants were operating within networks that connected the kingdom to other African societies and eventually to European traders. The arrival of Europeans did not create Benin's civilization. They entered a society that already had its own political institutions, artistic traditions, and economy. But trade brings opportunity, and it can also bring danger. As European commercial interests grew along the West African coast, relationships between African kingdoms and European powers became increasingly complicated. For Benin, those relationships would eventually move from trade and diplomacy toward confrontation. By the end of the 19th century, the world around Benin was changing rapidly. British influence was expanding across the region, and British officials and traders increasingly wanted greater access to the kingdom and its trade. Relations between Benin and Britain became increasingly tense. In January 1897, Acting Consul General James Phillips led a British mission toward Benin City. The mission included European officials and a large number of African carriers and support personnel. The Oba Ovonramwen had asked that the visit be postponed because of an important traditional ceremony. Phillips continued toward Benin. On January 4, 1897, the mission was attacked by Benin forces. Phillips and most of the members of his party were killed. The incident became the immediate trigger for a major British military expedition against Benin. Britain responded with a military expedition. The operation was placed under Rear Admiral Sir Harry Rawson, and British forces advanced toward Benin City in February 1897. The British called it a punitive expedition. On February 18, 1897, British forces entered and captured Benin City. The city was largely deserted when the British arrived, but resistance had been encountered along the route and during the capture. The occupation marked a devastating turning point for the kingdom. Then came one of the most consequential episodes in the history of African cultural heritage. British troops looted the royal palace and compounds, taking thousands of objects, including brass plaques, sculptures, ivory works, coral regalia, and other royal treasures. Many were taken back to Britain. Others were sold or passed into private collections and museums across Europe and elsewhere. The destruction went beyond the removal of objects. The royal palace and parts of the city were burned and devastated during the British occupation. The destruction shattered the physical center of Benin's royal world. The Oba Ovonramwen had escaped the city before its capture. He remained in hiding for months before eventually surrendering to the British. In September 1898, he was sent into exile in Calabar. With the capture and exile of Ovonramwen, the independent Kingdom of Benin had effectively come to an end. The territory was incorporated into Britain's expanding colonial administration. But the culture itself did not disappear. But the story of Benin did not end when the palace was captured. The objects taken in 1897 began appearing in museums, galleries, and private collections around the world. And more than a century later, one question would become impossible to ignore. Who should they belong to? After the destruction of Benin City, thousands of objects left the kingdom. Some were sold in the colonial market. Others entered museums and private collections in Europe and elsewhere. The world began to know them collectively as the Benin Bronzes. Over time, these works entered some of the world's most famous museums. They were studied, displayed, and admired for their extraordinary craftsmanship. But behind the beauty was a difficult question. How had they left Benin in the first place? For decades, the debate continued. Were these simply historical objects now held by museums? Or were they cultural treasures removed during a military invasion and therefore owed back to their place of origin? For Nigeria and many Edo people, the answer was clear. Then in the 21st century, the conversation began changing. Museums and governments increasingly faced demands to confront the colonial history behind their collections. One important development came from Germany. In 2022, Germany and Nigeria signed an agreement paving the way for the return of Benin objects from German museums. In December 2022, Germany returned the first 20 Benin Bronzes from 5 German collections to Nigeria. It was a significant moment, but it was not the end of the story. Across the Atlantic, another major institution made its own decision. The Smithsonian Institution transferred ownership of 29 Benin objects to Nigeria in 2022. 20 of those objects were returned to Nigeria. 9 remained in Washington under a long-term loan arrangement. But hundreds and potentially thousands of Benin objects remain dispersed among museums and private collections around the world. So the story of restitution is far from finished. But why does this matter today? Because these objects are not simply beautiful pieces of metal or ivory. They carry the memory of a kingdom. They show the faces of its rulers, the structure of its court, the skills of its artists, and the history of its people. When a culture loses objects like these, it loses part of the physical evidence of its own past. And perhaps that is what restitution is really about. Not simply moving objects from one building to another, but giving people the opportunity to encounter their own history where that history began. For Benin, the journey home has begun, but it is not over. The Benin kingdom was invaded. Its palace was destroyed. Its king was exiled. Its treasures were scattered across the world. But the people did not disappear. The culture did not disappear. And the story did not disappear. In 1897, Benin lost its independence. Its palace was devastated. Its king was exiled. Thousands of royal objects were scattered across the world. It would have been easy to believe that the story of the kingdom had ended, but it hadn't. The Edo people remained. Their language, traditions, ceremonies, craftsmanship, and memories continued to be passed from one generation to another. And the institution of the Oba survived. Today, the Oba remains an important traditional institution among the Edo people. The modern kingdom is not the same political state that existed before 1897, but the institution, the culture, and the memory of Benin remain deeply significant. And the objects that were scattered after 1897 have become part of another chapter. Nigeria, the Edo people, museums and governments continue to debate and in some cases act on the question of restitution. Some objects have already returned. Others remain abroad. The conversation is still unfolding. But perhaps the greatest lesson of Benin is not about bronze. It is about what happens when a people lose control of the way their own history is preserved and presented. For generations, people could walk into museums thousands of kilometers from Nigeria and see treasures created by Benin's artists. Today, the question is no longer simply how beautiful those objects are. The world is asking where they came from and what happened to the people who created them. History is not only about remembering what happened. It is about understanding what those events still mean today. Benin teaches us that a civilization can be attacked, its buildings destroyed, and its treasures scattered, not without destroying the people who carry its memory. The Kingdom of Benin was conquered. Its treasures were scattered. But Benin itself did not disappear. Because a kingdom is more than its palace, more than its walls, more than its bronzes. A kingdom lives in its people.